This video will walk you through how to revise your dialogue formatting in your narratives. In class, your group worked to put this sentence from Number the Stars together with the correct punctuation. In this video, we will review the most important rules for formatting dialogue in your own stories. Rule number 1. Use quotation marks around the exact words that are being spoken by your characters. The words that are being said are called the quotation or quote. In this example from class, most groups were able to figure out that this second part of the sentence needs quotation marks, but didn't identify this first part as needing them until we read really closely. Remember, anything that your characters are actually saying needs quotation marks. A good way to figure out where the quotation marks need to go is to say the sentence out loud. "Katie, let's go to the mall today," Camilla exclaimed. I know that Camilla wouldn't actually say, "Camilla exclaimed," so that part doesn't need quotation marks. I want to put quotation marks at the beginning and end of what's being said. Rule number 2. Use a comma to separate the quotation from the speech tag. This is the speech tag. The speech tag tells the reader who is saying the quote. Here's where the comma goes, between the quotation and the speech tag. Notice that the punctuation goes inside the quotation marks. First the comma, then the quotation mark. There are two ways to write this same piece of dialogue. The name of the speaker can go at the end of the quote, like in choice 1, or in the beginning of the quote, like in choice 2. Either way, you still need a comma between the quotation and the speech tag. Rule number 3. Instead of a comma, you can use a question mark or an exclamation point. Remember that the punctuation goes inside the quotation marks. Only use a period when the quote is at the end of a sentence. Again, remember that the punctuation goes inside the quotation marks. Rule number 4. Every time a new person speaks, start a new paragraph. Go to a new line and indent the line using the tab key. Here's an example. Now we will revise your story using these 4 rules. You will be reading through your story 4 times, focusing on one rule at a time. We'll go through this together. Let's look at an example. Here's the story as it is currently written. There are many dialogue formatting mistakes. First, I'll read the story while considering rule number 1. Use quotation marks around the exact words that are being spoken by your characters. I'm noticing that here, Layla says the words "don't worry," but there are no quotation marks to let my reader know that it's being spoken. I'll add them in now. Now take a moment to read through your entire narrative and check that you have followed rule number 1. Click pause and reread your story. Come back to the video and click play when you are ready to move on. Now I'll read the story while thinking about rule number 2. Use a comma to separate the quotation and the speech tag. Reading through this sample story again, I see 2 places where I forgot to put a punctuation mark to separate my quotation and the speech tag. Here and here. Let's add commas. Now take a moment to read through your entire story and check that you have followed rule number 2. Click pause and reread your narrative. Come back to the video and click play when you are ready to move on. Rule number 3 says that instead of a comma, I can use a question mark or an exclamation point. Reading back through this sample story, I think that this comma should actually be an exclamation point because it's being yelled. Let's change it. Now take a moment to read through your entire story for a third time and check that you have followed rule number 3. Click pause and reread your story. Come back to the video and click play when you are ready to move on. Now I'll read my story a fourth and final time, checking for rule number 4. Every time a new person speaks, start a new paragraph. To do this, I'll hit enter to go to a new line and then indent the line using the tab key. Most of my story looks okay, but I forgot to start a new paragraph here, where Haley responds. Now take a moment to read through your entire story and check that you have followed rule number 4. If you need to start a new paragraph, go to a new line by clicking enter and indent that line using the tab key. Click pause and reread your story, checking for rule number 4. Come back to the video and click play when you are ready to move on. If you followed these 4 rules, you have improved the dialogue formatting in your narrative. Reflect on the changes on your revision handout.